In this tutorial, we're going to go over how to use the spot healing brush, the healing brush tool, patch tool, content aware move tool, several of these tools under here, and also the clone brush tool. And so to start with, please go ahead and open scratchy.psd. You should download that from Blackboard. This image I found online, and as you can see, there are all of these scratches. Then this was originally printed out on paper, and then it was scratched at some point in its lifetime. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through and we're going to be starting to use these tools as they're intended, at least in some ways intended, and that is to clean the image up. And so what I'd like you to start with is the tool that looks like a Band-Aid, and specifically the spot healing one, which has this little dashed icon here. It's the first one, it's the top one in the window. And the way this tool works is, first, if you look up the options bar, you'll see I've got my tool listed here. There are no assigned presets. These commands look a lot like brush commands, right? I can change angle, roundness, I can actually have the size beat pen pressure, etc. The mode is normal. There's several different modes. You'll note you might recognize multiply, screen, color, and luminosity. We're going to start with normal. And then there's several different types we can do. And we're going to begin with content aware. That's usually the default. And we'll talk a bit more about what content aware fill is in a bit. But this will be our first experience with it. So I'm going to set the size of this thing. 20 is a little big. I'm going to go ahead and set it to 10 pixels. Okay, so there's a couple of these spots that are going to be tricky, right? This is going to be one of them. If I click on that, you see his ear, but you don't have a nice hard edge, and we're going to come back to that one in a bit. We're actually going to leave that one alone. But these other ones, if I just click on them once, they disappear into the background, right? That's pretty amazing. It just automatically figures out what I want it to do. So if I come up to some of these longer streaks, even this one on her forehead, even this big streak on her forehead, the content aware tool can do a pretty good job of eliminating, right? Like there's a little tiny bit of blurriness in there, but overall it looks really great. Again, I don't know if that's a scratch or if that's food on her fingers. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to grab that little one by her chin. And the letter J is the quick key for the healing brush set of tools, and the letter H is the hand tool. So what's nice is they're right next to each other, and I can use the hand tool to move over, hit the letter J, and then come over here and start drawing on top of this. Now, really, all you'll notice what I'm doing is I'm just taking and drawing with this dark gray over whatever I want to eliminate. So some of these scratches here, get rid of those. Now you'll notice sometimes there are minor changes. Like if I go in and get this one, it's actually grabbing information from far enough away that it's grabbing this other line. So that's not going to work out for me, right? So let's go ahead and do some of these other ones, and we'll come back and I'll show you the better tool for doing those. So I'm just going to keep going, keep going, keep going. And so pretty quickly you can see that you can clean up images really effectively, right? I can just go through here. I could spend all day doing this, but I'm not going to. Now here's another spot where weird things happen. And so I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to grab all of this stuff because I know that it could cause me issues in the future. All right, so let's grab a couple more of these little highlights here. Okay, so you can see that already this is starting to look much better. I'm going to get this one on her leg here. Get that little one right there. Looks like there's one there. Now with these, there's several different modes and several different types that you can do. Normal works pretty well most of the time. Depending on what you're working on, some of these other options may work better. There's a nice little scratch up here. I'm just going to hit that and disappear it with replace. That seemed to do the same thing. I'm going to undo that because I just want to go through and click on each of these. Here's multiply and show you what it does. So you'll notice multiply works. but it softens it. It doesn't get rid of it. It just softens the effect. And so if I go over it multiple times, eventually it will delete it. I'm going to bring that back to full strength. I'm going to go to screen now. Right? And screen kind of does the same thing. Multiply and screen are opposites, much as darken and lighten are opposites, right? So with darken, this thing is gone. With lighten, what it's going to do is it's actually going to do almost absolutely nothing, right? It lightens the area, and because this is a highlight, that's not going to do what we want it to. Now, if we wanted to get rid of, say, this crease in his pants, right, we could pull this over, and using lighten, it's going to disappear much more quickly than if we were to go in and use darken. Right? Darken doesn't do anything to those, lighten does. So depending on if you're working on highlights or if you're working on dark scratches, you may want to change that. Luminosity is another option, right, where it's going to get rid of a lot of the darker areas. That's one of the things it's good at. It actually works on pretty much everything. All right. So if we use proximity match, let's go ahead and see if we can find an area here where it's going to make a big problem. Let's say I want to get rid of that line, that seam. All right, if I use a proximity match, things start looking a little weird. If I come in here and draw this, you'll see what it's doing is it's actually grabbing information from nearby and overlaying it. Right? And if I do content aware in here, I'm going to get a much better result. Now, that doesn't mean proximity match is awful. It means that each of those has a different potential use. There are times when you would like to use one over the other. Now, if we go back up to his ear, and if we come up here and make sure that we don't have too much overhang, we might, with content aware and normal, we might even be able to get something that's passable. It depends on, right? If we were looking at this picture from this far away, we're not really going to notice that his ear is blurry, but you never know. Okay, so along with using this tool to get rid of things that are mistakes, sometimes you want to get rid of details that are in the image. Like let's say we want to get rid of these black holes. So I'm just going to come over here and just start drawing on them and zoom in a little bit so you guys can see better, right? And they just disappear into the white paint. So now I've taken that line, things out. Maybe I want to get rid of this text here as well, this C60 or G60, whatever that says. All right, so maybe I want to just come down here and see if I can get rid of this with this tool. Did a pretty good job. Let's get rid of that. All right, so that was distracting as well. So I can take and bend reality to my will, get rid of that little nut, get rid of this one. I don't know why I'd want to get rid of all of these, but you get the point, right? You can use this to eliminate very selective elements. Now, as I said, there's certain times when you try and use this tool and it fails you, right? You get this little chunk taken in here. If I was to come across here, it looks like that actually works a lot better, oddly enough. But so you get these issues. So there's other tools that you can use. The spot healing tool is the simplest to use in that you don't define the area you're selecting from. All you do is you click on it and it automatically fills it in. If you need something more precise, the next tool down is the healing brush tool. The healing brush tool works exactly the same. It has slightly different settings up here, you'll notice. I believe it defaults to multiply. I may be wrong about that. But what it does is, in order to set, if I just click on it, it gives me an error. And that's because I need to option click. We hold down the option key in order to select where we want to be grabbing color information from, and then click once. And once we've done that, as we move our brush, you'll see that wherever I have selected, it's going to start. So if I was just to click here and start drawing, right, it's not going to show anything. if I was to click here and start drawing, you can see that it's starting to make some of those changes. Now I'm going to undo that. I'm going to change from mode from multiply. I'm going to make it normal. And now if I come over this, the top of this, I'm getting a much better result. It's still a little bit light here. And so there's one final way that I can fix that a little bit. And that's that I can grab, I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool, which allows me to draw straight lines. Oops. And I am going to come up here, I'm going to click, and I'm going to create a selection area so that when I do this, I can go right up to the edge and not spill over that edge. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to hit the letter J. And this time I'm going to come in here and you'll see again, I'm getting that edge information. So what I really probably need to do is actually make this smaller and make it harder. And just come in and grab just what I need to hit right there. All right, so if you're having issues with it spilling over onto another color field, you can add a selection area. And I'm going to deselect that now, which is Command or Control D. You can also change the brush size, and that allows you to be more precise in your application, right? Just like with any other brush. So now, if I hold down Option and click here, I can select this guy. Right, and these again would be really challenging to do with another tool. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to bring this in, and sometimes it's good to just, you know, wiggle the brush around a few times and slowly work your way in there if the area's kind of obnoxious as far as how you can set this up. So I'm going to grab this. There we go. That's a little bit better. I'm going to do it again. And you can see that it's still a little light in there, so I just want to make sure that when I do this, I get things set. Now, I'm not super concerned about that. I can go back to the spot healing brush for some of these little areas, right? They just need to go away. They're just little mistakes. Nobody really cares. Here we are. All right, so that's a spot healing brush. Now, with some of these other tools, I'm actually going to be using them in a slightly different way than they're intended, just because I think it makes more clear what you can do with those tools. So one of the other options for fixing issues such as this one, which is still an issue, is the clone stamp tool. And the clone stamp tool and the healing brush tool work very, very similarly. But you'll notice that instead of where the healing brush, if I come back here and grab the healing brush tool, right, when I come in here, it actually blends the two colors together, right? So you can kind of see that it's pulling the white in, and it's really creating a gradient between the two. Whereas if I use the rubber stamp tool, or the clone stamp tool, which is this stamp here, hold down Option, make sure I have something selected, and I do this, it does the opposite, right? It really just paints with whatever you have selected. It doesn't do any blending between the background and what you have selected. You can change and set the mode to multiply or screen or whatever you want to do. You can change the opacity, but no matter what, it's acting more like a paintbrush. It's actually just applying whatever you've selected. So with this brush, it's really important, if you have a hard edge, to make a selection area so you don't accidentally jump outside of it. And now, with my clone stamp tool selected, I can come in here and I can draw like this, and then when I hit deselect, now I have this nice hard edge. I did go, oh, no, it was just a default, but now I have that nice hard edge and I was able to fill all the way in. Right, so each of these tools works similarly but slightly differently as well. So again, something I really want to, this is where using the clone stamp would be good, is on these marks here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a selection area again, and then I'll use my clone stamp tool. And by the way, S for stamp is the letter we use, and so I'm just going to go ahead and select there, and then just start drawing in here. Now what's nice about this is I'm actually, except for that last little bit there. I'm going to undo that. But what's nice about this is if I hold down Option and I click right here on the edge, I can actually line the edge of the sign up here and just start clicking and dragging and pulling that around. Now again, if I go too far, the little cross that's following my brush is going to overrun where there's lines there. So I want to stop, and then I'm going to hold down Option, select a new area, come in up here a little bit higher, and fill the rest of those in. Right. So those are gone. Okay, so I've taken care of a bunch of the scratches. There's still some down here. If you want more practice, go for it. But what we're going to do is we're going to move forward a little bit, and we're going to start making some odd adjustments to this image. Now, one of the things that we can do, if you look under the Healing Brush tool, there's the Patch tool and the Content Aware Move tool. So the Patch tool, let's do the Content Aware Move tool first. This is this icon here. And let's go ahead and grab this cake, which makes me think the yellow on the girl's fingers is indeed cake and not something else. And I'm just selecting around his fingers. I'm going to move this guy over here and let it go. Right, and so first, now I've just got this little selection. It's a copy of what I had before. And I'm just going to stick this over here on the wall to start with. Now, this is much like a transform in that you have to double click it in order to set it. Now, once I do that, you'll see what happens. It's disappeared what I had selected and filled it in with content from around it. And then it's done the same thing on the piece that it's added to the wall here. I honestly have never found a good use for this tool. I'm going to undo that. Something you can do that's pretty creepy is if you actually select one of their eyes, pull this over and maybe drop it on her forehead, right? I'm going to get a kid with no eye that's going to blend nicely. And then if I hit Command or Control D to deselect this, now she's got an eye in her forehead. And that's pretty weird. So I'm going to go ahead and undo both of those things, right? And deselect that. And again, it really, with this tool, it matters what's around it. Something that's got a few more options than the Content Aware Move tool. You can move it, you can extend it, you can change a couple settings there, no big deal. Is the Patch tool. The Patch tool allows you to do something similar. So let's go ahead and grab, I'm just going to grab one of her eyes and I'm going to put it on her own forehead here. Right, but the Patch tool, by default, if I click and drag this, you'll see what it does by default is that it's grabbing the source, right? And so wherever I put this over, it's going to blend with what's underneath it. Now you'll notice that it barely blended, right? It's got this little dark spot there from her freckle, but I can't really see anything else. And that's because this transparent option is checkmarked. If I uncheck that and do the same operation and then hit Command or Control D just so you can see, right? It works a lot more like the Content Aware Move tool. However, it doesn't add something to her forehead. It just takes her forehead and applies it somewhat realistically, or it blends it nicely, I guess, with the existing area underneath. Her eye's totally covered up, but this is reasonably seamless where she used to have an eye. All right, so if we undo a couple steps and change this from source to destination, now if I pull her eye up here, then it's going to blend whatever I have selected with the background, right? And so this doesn't look so great because her eye is actually a little bit lighter than it should be. I'm going to go ahead and undo those steps. So the Patch tool set to normal and destination with transparent unchecked is really good at taking something and blending it with the existing object. So if I do something like, say, let's highlight one of his eyes, and I pull this down and I put it on her knee, you'll see that the colors are very, very different when I start. And when I release this, it really brings in the background colors and blends this very, very well. So I can do things like, like have creepy little toddler eyes on her kneecaps, right? And both of those blended really nicely, almost seamlessly. All right, so again, I can probably do a similar thing with her eyes. All right, if I was to grab one of these guys, and let's go ahead and put this on, let's just put it on his leg here. Right, so you can see that this patch tool works much differently, right? It allows us to, we can repair things with it as well, but it really allows us to do a lot of pretty challenging manipulations really, really quickly. Let's go ahead and look at one other example just to show you there's one other way that you can actually get rid of objects rather than using the healing brush tool or the clone stamp tool. You can actually just create a selection area, and we're going to use this Blur Japan image. We're going to be doing a lot with this, and to start with, we're going to get rid of a couple of these ships. So go ahead and grab one of your selection tools. I'm just going to grab the default freehand lasso tool, because this is just drag this up around here and select this. And one of the things about doing what we're about to do, which is get rid of this boat, is you don't need it to be right up against the edges of the object in order to do it. All you need to do is select the object, and then once you have the selection area going, you right click on it, go down to fill, and by default this is usually set to background color, the contents bar, but if you change this to content aware and then hit OK, there's some other options you have here, but we're just going to say OK. And it very quickly grabs information from around the edges and most of the time does a really good job getting rid of whatever you had selected, right? So that boat is totally gone. If I want to, I can come in here and I can grab, I should probably grab a little bit more. Again, you definitely want a little bit more space around the boat. Sometimes this doesn't work, and I'm hoping I can actually make it not work. Oh, all right, so this already started to. You can see now there's that edge in there that's not quite right. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to deselect it, and I'm going to reselect it. And I'm going to make it a little bit smaller in the selection area. Now, this might be an issue because this line is kind of faded here and then gets a little bit darker, but we'll see. Fill, oops. Yeah, so that was much better. So sometimes the size and shape of your selection area can make a huge difference on how well this is applied. All right, so somewhere else you might want to try and get rid of is these guys right here. And we'll see how effectively we can do this. Yeah, in that case it worked really well. So this is kind of like magic in a lot of ways. There are certain cases when it doesn't work very well. So say for instance, I want to get rid of this tree right here. Let me go ahead and subtract that selection real quickly. And then I'm going to right click on this, fill, content aware, OK. And so you'll see because the color information exactly like right over here is touching this flagpole, it's going to pull some of that in here. It did a really great job over the vast majority of this image, but it also failed right here where it was touching the edge of this. And there's only so much you can do about that, right? If I was to actually make this a smaller selection area, because the tree goes right up to the edge there, no matter what I do, I'm going to have issues with this. Right? So again, still having issues. So this is a case where if I want to get rid of that tree, I would actually need to use probably a combination of the rubber stamp and the healing brush tool in order to remove it from the scene. All right, in other words, I'd have to do it manually. So in this case, I could hold down Option. I might want to grab a much larger area here and then just come in here and really start painting this tree away. And you'll notice I have to be really careful because if my brush is too big, it's going to start grabbing that other color information. Right? And if there's any creases like this, horizontal creases, you just want to make sure that you line it up, right? It can be a lot of work to get rid of something that you don't want. And you just have to be aware that this is the way this process works. So I'm not going to finish removing this tree, but you get the idea that you can manually go through and achieve a similar result. It just takes a lot more time to do it. So first, try using the content aware fill, and if that doesn't work, then move on to the next option.